Hello and welcome to another Fall of the Empire video. In today's episode we will take a closer look at the Battle of Katze and what each of the three major sides hoped to achieve during the course of this battle. And we will start with the Empire of Baharuth and the plans of his emperor. Despite being witness to the Floor Guardians' might and glory, and despite being able to see some of the elite troops they command, Jerknif still believed himself to be somehow able to compete with the mastermind that is Ainzes Spell. He therefore convinced the soon-to-be ruler of Erantel to open the Battle of the Katze Plains with his strongest spell. During this endeavor, Jerknif pursued three major goals. First and foremost, everybody and their blind dog should be able to see just how much of a threat Ainz and his minions truly pose, thereby making it pretty obvious that only a grand alliance of all neighboring states could hope to defeat Nazarick. If mankind wouldn't band together, then they would be ripped apart, one by one. The second goal was to determine the extent of Ainz's strength. Once it is roughly known what the Sorcerer King can do at his best, one can prepare the appropriate countermeasures. If Ainz is, for example, able to kill 5,000 men with his strongest spell, this alone would necessitate an army of 50,000 or even 100,000 men to contain him, either by outright killing the Sorcerer King or, and this is far more likely, by letting him run out of mana, since such a powerful spell must surely cost a lot of it. Furthermore, if Jerknif took the Death Knights and the other minions into account, then it is no wonder that he was in desperate need for far more troops and allies such as the Theocracy or the Arkland Council State, ruled by the 5 Dragon Lords, Platinum amongst them, in order to take out the stronger entities of Nazarick after they have been sufficiently weakened by killing thousands of men each. Thinking about the amount of sacrifice necessary, it was of vital importance that Jerknif also pursued his third plan, starting a civil war amongst the servants of Nazarick. This was something that had already failed the very moment Jerknif fell for 2 traps at once. Mare won't betray Ainz, nor would Demiurge or any other of Nazarick's servants, especially not out of mere self-interest or for the sake of an outsider, like Jerknif hoped to. But again, ignorance is truly a bliss. And so, while in the past years the battle was just a pretext to weaken the economy of the kingdom by forcing it to commit peasants to the battlefield just at the time of harvest, this winter war would mark the long-awaited push for Erantel. After Ainz casted his spell, the Imperial Knights would rush into the breach and decisively beat the royal army. After that, the Empire's many casters would breach the wall of Erantel, so that the Imperial Knights could rush into the breach once again and conquer the city, before gifting it to Ainzes Spell so that he may establish his kingdom. And while speaking of blissfully ignorant plans, the kingdom once more prepared themselves for the battle at the plains. Again, at this point in time it was more of an institutionalized skirmish than anything resembling a full-scale war. Amongst the nobility of the kingdom, the annual wars was also seen as a somewhat safe way to obtain a battle record and the bragging rights associated with actually putting your life on the line for once, instead of just chilling at your mansion and oppressing the local peasantry. But even for Re-Estize, this battle was different. The political position of the king and his royal faction had been strengthened to a great degree, due to his majesty being present among the defenders of Re-Estize city during the demonic incursions, and because the younger prince rode through the city streets, pretending to aid everybody, and due to Climb, the battlefield representative of the Golden Princess, fighting against and overcoming a powerful demon, saving countless captured civilians in the process. At least this was what he was allowed to think. But anyway, thanks to the stronger position, Ramposa III managed to assemble a fairly large host, even by the standards of the kingdom, which relies mainly on conscripted peasants rather than actual warriors. Though professional soldiers also exist, the elite troop of Marcus Bulup or the royal warriors under Gazev Stronov are the two most prominent examples. And while the bulk of the army was made up of amateurs, the same could be said about the command structure, usually uniting the various minor and major noble houses behind one common cause without making them hate and distrust each other or the king too much, was one of the most important aspects of any strategy meeting. And only thanks to Marquis Raven's diplomatic efforts and his perceived neutral position was it made possible to get both major factions to agree on one common course of action. But again, thanks to the king's stronger position and the fact that he managed to gain more gravitas in battle, meant that every minor and major house would now try to do the same to regain their position, to strengthen it further, or at least to keep face. And this is how they managed to assemble over 200,000 men under arms in the first place. In contrast, the Empire committed 6 of its 8 legions, and therefore their army numbered only 60,000 men in total. Despite this, it was the greatest number of soldiers ever present on the Empire's side. And so, the kingdom dared to hope that because of their numerical superiority, they perhaps might be able to inflict enough casualties among the imperial knights, who in contrast to the peasants had a value beyond their numbers and therefore would be much harder to replace than some random civilian with a spear. After the war is won, the king's position at court would be further strengthened, and since the empire would need years to lick its wounds and recover, the Kingdom of Re-Estize had finally enough time to end the internal conflicts. If the kingdom didn't teeter on the edge of civil war at all time, and if the backwater bureaucracy and government could be finally reformed, then the kingdom could regain enough of its strength to permanently chase off the empire. But just as Baharuth, the kingdom underestimated this mysterious Ainzes Spell completely. After the nobility proudly displayed its ignorance about anything and anyone magical, the only reason for why even 10,000 troops were committed to contain Ainzes Spell was Gazev Stronov, who vehemently warned the court about Ainzes' strength, and as usual these days, any intelligent input was more or less dismissed because everybody was busy with keeping face and power. After all, no one at court except Gazev had heard about this man and his supposed rights to Irantel, and the kingdom couldn't afford to lose the valuable fortress city, and since this was the king's own land we are talking about, the royal faction couldn't show weakness either, or they would risk to lose all they had gained and much more. And therefore many peasants were dragged away from their farms and their homes and made to be meat shields in a war they not only hated, but so far never won. In sharp contrast to the imperial knights, who stood proud in front of the fortress they had constructed so close to Irantel without any repercussions, the peasants were already demoralized to a moderate extent. But very soon, they would be shaken even more than the peasants. Behind them, a host consisting of, by New World standards, legendary undead, death knights and soul eaters, were marching out of the castell. As fast as they were allowed to, the knights hastily made room for the sorcerer king, who controlled this powerful undead host. Once he stood at the center of the two army wings, he began casting, and while not being the strongest spell of Ainz, he chose an incredible, impressive and flashy one, Ea Shub Nigurath, super tier magic which calls upon the mother of 1,000 young, one of the outer gods herself. Yep, at this day, malnourished peasants who were conscripted against their will in order to fight a pointless war, while the harvest was left to rot in the fields, were up against a Lovecraftian horror, summoned by another Lovecraftian horror, since Ainz seems to be akin to Azathoth, the Demon Sultan, or the Blind Idiot God, if you want a one-way ticket to Demiurge's happy farm. So the already bleak odds were not in their favor. You see, not only the kingdom and the empire had their little agenda. Nazarick, after spending 8 books more or less hidden, would finally emerge from the underground tomb and establish a foothold in the new world. In his endless wisdom, the brilliant Overlord of Nazarick had chosen Irantel, possibly as soon as he arrived at Khan village, and decided to conquer it as soon as his alter ego, Momon the Dark Hero, along with his friend, Nabe, arrived at the city. They would quickly build up their image as strong, rightful and just heroes, and since now they had the trust of the citizens and defeated an undead army before, they could now act as a beacon of hope, as an assurance that the people will be safe and ruled over justly, despite falling under the rule of an undead. And of course they would also be able to tell this fellow human about their problems, worries and fears. Unbeknown to them, Pandora's actor would forward all of these informations to the intelligence apparatus of the Sorcerer Kingdom, so that it may end any uprising before it even started. Now, with the preparations finally complete, Ainz could use this opportunity to intimidate and discourage any potential direct aggression from the neighboring countries via a show of force. The Empire, the Kingdom, and even the Theocracy wouldn't dare to outright attack the new-founded kingdom while it was still vulnerable. Again, relatively speaking, as it would soon have a garrison of legendary undead. Like Expelliarmus, the spell should also disarm Jerknev by frightening his soldiers to the point that they flat out refuse to openly fight against the Sorcerer Kingdom. With his biggest stick out of his hand, Jerknev's only hope would be to form a grand alliance between all human nations in order to save his empire and his skin. A move the great Sorcerer King had already anticipated. And while everybody had their eyes upon the magnificent Sorcerer King, a flash of blue light suddenly emerged around him. The spell had begun. Right here and now. This is the perfect place for a cliffhanger. And in the next video we will discuss the massacre of the Katze Plains and its implications for the kingdom and the empire at greater detail. But for now, this is it. So have a nice day, thank you for watching, over and out.